Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Um, well, how's everybody? Or is everybody wonderful? Is everything wonderful? Or words to that effect? Yeah, I don't know. Um, did you enjoy oh, Marcus Lewis? I see the thumbs up. I never saw that one before. Okay. Yeah. Did you enjoy your spring recess, I guess we called it? Hmm. Good. Glad. Anybody do anything interesting?
I might be headed to a physics conference.
You went to a what?
I might be headed to a physics conference soon.
Physics. Okay, tell me
Yeah,
about that, please.
I'm going to a optical physics conference next week. Um, I just got invited like last week, so I was excited. Yeah,
I didn't know you did that kind of stuff. Do you do that kind of stuff?
I was trained as a physicist and then I switched to AI. Yes.
Oh, okay. I get
Yeah.
it. I knew a an optical physicist at Caltech. I wonder if any come to mind. You know people at Caltech who do this kind of thing? He'd be probably about 60 now.
I was mostly at UW, University of Washington. So yeah, I did like more nonlinear physics actually, but then some people who are like working on like AI for physics reached out to me. So that's kind of how I got involved in that again. So
Oh, yes, I see.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So, uh, does AI have a place in physics?
Like a lot of like data generation like that are
Oh,
how do
yes.
you yeah, how do you do that like automatically, but also can you like reproduce like invariance with modeling, like physical invariances?
Okay, so like I understand that they get these huge files from things like the Jack Web, and AI could be useful in just going through that data and finding interesting things.
Yeah.
Um, when you say finding invariance, I mean, that's when I think of invariances, I basically think of
Yeah.
laws of nature in this case. Yeah.
Like how do
Uh,
you like so if you have like a relatively seemingly plausible like physics generation, how do you make sure that they're correct? Like one way like that you can do that is using like physical invariance laws to automatically verify that, which is like pretty rare for most other data sets.
well, so I know there's a move among mathematicians to
Yeah.
have their proofs computer checked. And so is this an analogous thing
Yeah.
in physics? Ah, gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting endeavor, I think, and it seems to me the way to go in math, and so presumably in physics as well.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's exactly the same analogy. Yeah.
So, just to since we got about a minute before I'll start the formal stuff, what do you think about the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics, or interpretation, I should say, of quantum mechanics?
Mm, I think it's a really interesting theory. I can like presume that it could be like I don't think too much whether something is like true or not, but I think it's plausible. Like and like I think there are some interesting like consequences of it possibly that seems
Yeah,
to sometimes bear out.
yeah, and I think so as well. I mean, certainly quantum physics, here's the equations, uh, has worked, right? And I don't think that's in doubt. What I think is that these interpretations of what world it describes, these equations, uh, is very much in doubt. And
Yeah.
it seems to me um, it starts to become philosophy at that point more than anything else. Um, and as one who has the advantage of neither being a philosopher nor a physicist, but still has an opinion, I don't buy the existence of all of these many worlds. It doesn't work for me. Um, okay, so let's see. Well, we could begin our sharing and uh, our lecture. Okay, so something here. Huh. Okay, so you may recall that the last time we met, uh, I was anxious and upset because um, I was trying to figure out what was going on with the metadata and all of that stuff. And and I couldn't fit everything together. There was obviously some thing going on that I wasn't aware of. You may also remember, I hope you do, that we just started to discuss the mathematical foundations for of, well, Preen theory is what I'm intended to write on this slide. Okay. And we discussed the set of physical objects and the set of physical objects that could exist and those that did exist. You recall that? Okay, John, please.
No, sorry to interrupt, Professor. I had a question that's related to this topic.
Please.
So not to derail any plans. I just like to get your thinking about this, which is I was wondering. So if you think about a wave, the idea of a wave, right? We can say it's a meme stored in our brains, for example. Agree?
Well, there's, yes, yes, I think I do agree. Yeah.
Okay. So my question would be if a wave in a beach, like in an ocean, would that be considered a copy of that wave brain?
Right. Okay. So these were the kinds of questions that were disturbing me. Because, for example, when we discussed this metadata, which I thought was important, the question arises, is metadata a preen? When it's stored metadata in the brain, is that a meme? Right? And so I that was a hint that the theory needed work, right? Okay. So uh, if you had asked me that the last time the class met, I would have said, don't ask me that because, you know, it's just confusing and upsetting to me. However, and and this may be a little guidance in doing research.
That is the last of my intentions, I want to assure you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But actually I appreciate that. I appreciate being upset. And it's the price that I've been willing to pay to focus my mind on research. So when some proof I'm working on falls apart, which is the basic life of a mathematician, right? Okay. I don't like it, right? I'm upset. But I also know from experience that that anxiety and that, you know, depression or whatever words we want to use will focus my brain, including the unconscious part, on trying to remove that irritation. And that's the way I get research done. Like well, my brother is kind of he's into Zen. And his goal in life is at least partially uh, to never get upset, to, always put things in a perspective where he can sort of remove him. This is my impression of his impression, what he's saying. And and that's fine. And you can run your life that way, perhaps. And he seems to run it quite fine that way. But he's not in the math business. And in the math business, if I, you know, transcended my anxieties about my proofs falling apart, I might never do more. I might never resolve them. So, for whatever that's worth, that was intended to be guidance in doing research. All right. But the good news from all of this is all that anxiety paid off. And so I now know until things fall apart again, but I hope they don't and expect that they won't. Uh, I now know what the mathematical foundation of set theory is. Set theory. Why did I write set? Okay. Of preen theory is. Okay. And that pleases me. Yes. And maybe we'll get to that at some point in the course because it's really interesting. And it also relates to what Isabel and I were just discussing, whether the many worlds view uh, is tenable and what it means. Okay. All right. So now let's turn to an easier topic, which is what is consciousness? Okay. I know that's sort of beneath our dignity to worry about such an easy problem, but I'd like your ideas. What is consciousness? Someone help me out here. Uh, Anybody? Yes, Julian. Been a while, Julian.
Yeah.
Okay,
Hey,
come on.
so I remember I think it was Plato talked about the difference between different living things where like plants can't think, animals can think, and humans can think about thinking. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and there's this line where you can talk about like, are you sentient or are you conscious? But I guess animals are also conscious beings. Um, Whether they're like self-conscious, who knows? But basically, I don't know. It's can you reasonably problem solve and be aware of your ability to do so, maybe?
I, I I have never used the term in this context of self-consciousness, and that's a important difference, perhaps. That, one could say some animals may be conscious, but not self-conscious. Okay, that's a good idea. Ryan, help me out here, please.
Um, Maybe this is a little simplistic, but I'm sort of seeing it as like um, the if you take the brain and then you remove all of the stuff that sort of happens automatically. So like we talked previously about
Mhm.
like the part of the brain that functions without language, the part that like when you wake up,
Mhm.
you just sort of have an answer and you don't know why. If you take that part away, what's left, I
Mhm.
think, is the conscious.
That's a nice idea as well. I like it. Uh, Anybody else got something to say? This is a good opportunity if you've never been involved in discussions, in the class to get involved because um, nobody, uh, I mean, because we all have vague ideas about consciousness and what it means. So, it's sort of there's no right or wrong here. Um, any other participants? All right. Yeah. Okay. Um, I'm going to, in the next chapter of, this is going to come from DTD, but in the next chapter that uh, that we're now going to read, I'm going to say something about consciousness and then wonder how it fits in with your notions of consciousness. All right. So here we go. Oh, no, no, I'm not going to make that mistake. Sorry, William. Okay,
It's
let's do
okay.
this. All right. Share. Yes, share with sound. Okay, I'm going to need a thumbs up if this works. Well, this should have said on the evolution of the human brain, but okay, so hopefully things are in order once again. On the evolution of the human brain.
As previously stated, the human brain is a computer. What a piece of work is a man! We are often amazed by what it can do. But in our amazement, we may lose sight of the fact that it is the result of a very long sequence of small incremental improvements. In this chapter, I will consider how such small improvements could give rise to the human brain, and how some of our brain's most amazing features, like consciousness, are the unsurprising result of the evolution of biological computers. What is the source of the evolutionary pressure that drives organisms like planarians with relatively simple brains to evolve into humans with impressive ones? Proposition 9. Computers work. Better computers work better. This may seem too frivolous to be called a proposition, but it is a central feature of pre-evolution. Proposition 9 is in action in our daily lives. Since ENIAC, we have watched.
You know what ENIAC is, yeah?
Yes, one of the first computers in the
Mhm.
1940s, I think, right?
Yes, in fact, if I get it right this time, which I often don't, I think it was February 16th, 1945, that it was introduced to the world.
Since ENIAC, we have watched our computers become incredibly fast and the size of their memories become gigantic. With each advance, we are amazed at the things we can do now that we could not do earlier. Many times, these amazing new things, these killer apps, were only discovered after improvements in computers made them possible. The genes have also learned Proposition 9 and have invested heavily in better computers. Not every such investment improves the chance of survival, but it works often enough that, through time, the computers in organisms have gotten better and better. As an aside, we sometimes hear that humans developed very large brains to help them walk on two legs or develop language. This seems teleological. It may be that the genes' investments in better computers led to larger brains, and bipedal walking and language were killer apps picked up along the way.
So what do you think of that? uh, there's an argument, I mean, I've seen it, that we developed large brains to enable us to walk on two legs, or we developed maybe um, maybe because we started walking on two legs, we developed larger brains to take advantage of that. So I'd like to get your impressions of that sort of thinking. Or was it just that genes were investing in better and better computers, just as we do, uh, sort of betting that it would improve things, and eventually killer apps come along, like in our computers, AI, but in humans, maybe bipedal walking and language. So, or maybe there's no difference between those two views. I don't know. Hmm. So I don't think that once we started to walk on two legs, suddenly the genes said, "Oh, um, I'm going to invest more in this." That rather they just invested more, and some of that investing more helped us walk better and do various things. I don't know. Uh,
Oh,
seems, yes, what?
Professor.
Yes.
I was thinking
Nathan,
about it. Yes. So, are you familiar with the skeleton Lucy?
of course, yeah.
Um, Take this with a grain of salt, but I believe that skeleton was proven to be upright, correct? And I think we also know that Lucy may have not had that increased brain size.
Yes, that's correct. Wait, I should rephrase that. That's what I have heard numerous times. Yeah. Okay, so she didn't have, yes, just to get on your feet doesn't require that you have a particularly large brain. Uh, but uh, um, and so it seems unlikely to me that you can sort of trace backwards to say that humans developed larger brains as a result of walking on two legs, rather than say humans began walking on two legs because they had just developed brains that enabled them to do, and physiques that enabled that to happen. It was a killer app of the physical things
Yeah.
we became. Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you for that, Nathan.
Professor,
Okay,
sorry.
yes,
So what you're saying is that maybe the causality is just evolutionary, right? Maybe some genes invested in brains and then others didn't, and then the ones that did um, tended to increase their copy numbers and survive better, right? More efficiently, or
yes,
right? And then as a result of that, walking occurred as well, right?
yeah,
That's the, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah. So, for example, um, we as a society invest a lot in computers. And that means, among other things, that companies have to invest resources in building new computers. And while companies understand, faster is better, more memory is better, they have maybe those guidelines. And so they invest in those things, but it's not with the purpose that if it gets fast enough and, whatever else, that it will lead to AI as we now have it. It's just let's build better. Why? Because better computers work better and people will find a use for these things. Okay, so not a particularly critical view, but point, but Julian.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the same way that better computers are maybe more efficient. I think efficiency was a huge thing in, human evolution. If you look at it like a cow has four stomachs, right? Something like
Yes,
that. So they put a lot of energy into digesting food. And if you look at the food they eat, things like grass, it's tough to break down and there's a lot of like
yes,
crap nutrients.
yes.
Humans evolved to, eat to be carnivores, or not humans, but earlier primates that
Okay.
became, evolved into humans. They they were, carnivores, and they got all those nutrients for free, or
Omnivores.
omnivores. They were, yeah, because
Yeah,
they ate
okay.
both, but they got those
Yeah,
nutrients for
well,
free because
mhm.
they ate animals that had already done all that digestion, gotten all those nutrients, and it
Oh yeah.
allowed humans to use tissue that they would put in their stomach into their brain and get bigger brains. And I think bipedal motion is the same thing. I think that it uses a lot less energy to walk on two legs, compared to walking on all fours.
And
So
it makes you slower,
yeah, yeah, it
for
makes you
example. Okay,
humans
but
actually have really
anyway,
good endurance, right? Compared to like animals that use all four legs, they don't have they can't run for very long. Humans, weirdly enough, have very good stamina in terms of, keeping, long distance running.
yeah. So I accept that there's the genes are always mutating and and that some of those mutations lead to advantages, and that's essentially what Darwin said, right? And natural selection selects those that lead to sufficient advantages. And I guess I don't see why the investment in computers should be any different than that. Like, for example, oh, anyway, it's not that important a point of this, but let's go on with uh, this section. But thank you for those comments.
About 500 million years ago, planarians had brains composed of about 10,000 neurons and programmed to receive signals from light-detecting eye spots and to transmit signals to muscles that created movement.
Okay, so do I have a picture of a planarian? No. Okay, maybe not. Okay, so 500 million years ago, these planarians, sometimes called flatworms, and they're little teeny, actually kind of cute worms. They're not like worms in your garden that have two eye spots on the top of their heads. And they have little brains, little in the sense that there's only about 10,000 neurons in a planarian's brain. And what those brains can do is they can receive light. They have those light eye spots that the planarian have will detect the difference between uh, light and dark. That's all they can do. Sufficiently light or sufficiently dark. So these eye spots send a signal if it's light or if it's dark, I suppose whenever it switches. And the 10,000 neurons take this and process it and send it down a neuronal backbone, you could call it. Well, it's not a bone, but a spinal column. And that triggers the movement of its muscles. Well, it doesn't have arms, but okay. And the reason it might do that is because uh, they're little beasts, these things, and they live, I think they live in watery kind of places. But um, but it's good to get out of the light. because you get dehydrated and die. So they move to darkness whenever they have the opportunity based on this primitive system. Okay. You good with that? Okay, so
What if creatures that evolved after planarians had some more neurons? What killer apps would such creatures be able to exploit?
that's a good question. So that was 10,000 neurons. And, I'm envisioning that the genes are always trying to invest in computation. So what would happen if it evolved that you get an animal with 100,000 neurons, say? What would it use those for, or might use those for? Well, I guess okay. Ryan?
I guess finding and eating the animals that have 10,000.
Oh, yes, I hadn't thought of it in such terms, but yes, I like your way of saying it. Right. So I think something like this might
What if
happen.
creatures that evolved after planarians had some more neurons? What killer apps would such creatures be able to exploit? Perhaps we would get organisms that had higher resolution eyes than planarians.
Right? They could just tell light, dark, maybe be useful to be able to distinguish more things, right?
Planarians. Perhaps they could distinguish between large, medium, and small objects. This might help them distinguish between predators, mates, and prey.
Right? If you can just see some hazy thing and it's a large object, perhaps you can detect it's moving, or a object your size that's moving, or it's a small object that's moving, that might really help you in terms of avoiding predators, mating, and finding prey. Yes? Okay. Okay. So what happens if we give uh, things still more neurons? Then what should we expect to happen? So, we could give them some more. What might they be able to do? So I'm looking at this as sort of more and more neurons. What would successful beasts do with them that might help them survive? Now, a lot of investments in neurons may not have been worth it. Those species may have died. Okay, Ryan.
I guess so. If we're assuming that the previous iteration had like the ability to distinguish between large and small objects, future generations might start being able to distinguish between like predator and prey, and then maybe pursue the prey.
Yes, and that's what I also think. I mean, we're making this up, but it's a plausible story, right? We don't know what actually happened when more neurons came on board. We do know more neurons did come on board because there's a huge number in our brains, right? Okay. Okay, Julian.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know there's a like the when people look at like cars and they see faces in them, or when people see like faces in clouds, it's something that evolved where they can recognize patterns in nature, and it's something that allows you to detect predators. So I think, yeah, early on, once you get more
Oh,
neurons, after you can distinguish between big and small, it's valuable to know if something is a pair of eyes looking at you.
yes,
Those
yes, you're
predators.
right. So higher resolution, and still higher resolution would help. Yeah, it's a good point. And this envisioning thing, I think, is important. And we'll get to that shortly. All right, so
What if creatures that evolved after planarians had some more neurons? What killer apps would such creatures be?
well, we read that.
With some more neurons, perhaps they could calculate the trajectories of their prey and move efficiently to intersect them.
Yeah, that seems conceivable to me. Okay.
In fact, it appears that by 300 million years ago, dragonflies could do all of these things. Real Science, 2022.
Right. So dragonflies, they can do all of this stuff that we just described. They have more neurons than the planarian, but they can do all these things. And by the way, dragonflies are, I think, on some scale where you look at predators and you ask how often do their hunts succeed and how often do they fail? Like the lion, I think, is, 1 time in 10 they succeed. Okay. The highest I saw on a list of such considerations is the dragonfly that basically never misses. So it preys on these littler insects, yes? And if it locates one, it apparently can figure out the trajectory and move to it, yes? And it basically never misses. As I recall, it was 99.9% of its hunts and success. All right, but now we've got creatures, it's 300 million years ago, that could do some pretty interesting things, yes? So let's go on.
In addition, dragonflies could learn the characteristics of a favored mating area and navigate to it. Eason and Switzer, 2006. So, apparently their brains included memory devices in which they could store memes which impacted their future behavior.
So there's a study that shows that dragonflies actually learn locations where they have mating success. And they return to them time and time again. Yes? Now that's pretty sophisticated because you can't return to a place unless you have some memory of that place or its location or whatever it is. So dragonflies apparently had evolved enough of a brain that they could store such information and enough of a brain that they could use it to determine future behavior. They would go to those places. Yes? That's pretty sophisticated stuff. And it's already there 300 million years ago. So let's go on.
It is not surprising that a few 100 million more years of evolution would produce creatures with a colossal number of neurons. Such creatures might have eyes that could see with high resolution and brains that could compute and transmit highly complex instructions to actuators that would produce nuanced behavior in response to what was being seen. Such creatures would have acquired substantial memory capacity and used the memes they stored to refine their future behavior. We are such creatures.
Yeah, I mean, seems okay to me.
As an aside, it appears that the evolution of biological computers proceeded at a tectonic rate. While a planarian brain has about 10,000 neurons, a human brain has about 100 billion. Though it is a tremendous oversimplification, if there was a Moore's law for biological computation, it might be that the number of brain neurons doubles about every 30 million years.
Okay, so, very big simplification. But, Moore's law basically said we double every 18 months, I think it's, yeah. This is much, much slower. Yes. And we're doubling uh, on, uh, yeah, a ballpark roughly every 30 million years. It's a real slow tech industry. Okay.
Now that humans have so many neurons, what amazing killer apps do we use them for? We can look at the killer apps that have so far developed in our commercial computers to get a sense. Our computers can store movies composed of hundreds of thousands of individual images. They can manipulate these movies and create new ones that appear real but aren't. They can simulate future scenarios and evaluate them. For example, to develop better bombs, we sometimes use our computers to simulate devices exploding in various environments and to evaluate their effectiveness. Simulation allows for fast learning with low cost and low risk. Our computers can drive cars. These computers sense their environment and respond to it rapidly. Some of them not only see what is ahead but see themselves in real time as well. They process what they see and plan future behavior to avoid accidents. Our brains do all of these things. So, it should be no surprise that 500 million years after planarians, we can see ourselves in the context of our environment, record some of what we see, and process, think about, what has been stored to plan for a better future. Nor should we be surprised that part of this processing involves simulating elaborate fictional scenarios, and based partially on our performance in them, modifying our future behavior.
So I think we do all these things, and we can see that they're done by our commercial computers, so it's quite plausible that we can do them. And this simulating elaborate fictional scenarios, um, and then based on our performance in them, modifying our future behavior. I suspect that part of our dreams are such things. They're simulations, yes? I don't know. I mean, but I think it's the case. Here's a description that I've sometimes used when thinking about this. There's all of these submarines around the world, in particular, nuclear deterrent submarines, yes? And part of their construction is to make them as stealthy as possible, super stealthy. And nations that are in this kind of game, the US, Russia, China, presumably, and others have these submarines, and they go out and they find some location, and they basically, I think, lurk there. They just hang out there. And their primary function is to be there if there's a nuclear war. Yes. And so if in our country, the president says, we're at war, shoot off those missiles, then it's supposed to happen. Yes. I mean, these submarines are supposed to shoot off their missiles. Okay. But the president can't go talk to these submarines. Yes. So it's all happening via some form of communication. It might be electromagnetic. It might be even sonar. I don't know, but some form of communication. Yes. It's remote. So let's say you're running the country. What would you be worried about your submarine captains? What would you have to take into consideration? Nothing comes to mind. Here's two things that come to mind for me. One is you don't want somebody who's crazy or goes crazy while they're the captain of one of these submarines and decides they're going to fire off these missiles because they think it's the right thing to do. You don't want that, right? You also don't want a captain who's going to start becoming a consider moral issues at the time the signal comes in to shoot off those missiles. Yes, that is, it ain't something that I think most human beings would look forward to doing, killing, you know, millions and millions of people. Yes. So I think what you're concerned about is if I give them the signal, are they really going to pull the trigger? Yeah. Now, the first issue of what if the guy goes nuts? Then we have all these safeguards that I think are built in. You know, the two keys are needed. I'm sure it's much more sophisticated now, right? That if somebody goes nuts, they can be countermanded. Yes. Okay. But what do you do about this, the moral captain who you don't want in position, right? What do you do? So think about this a little bit. What would you do? Ryan?
I mean, the obvious answer is to just not use a human.
Oh, well, that, that might be a pretty good answer. It comes with certain complications uh, that if you're not going to use a human, I assume you're going to use a computer. And you get into all sorts of issues of can you trust computers because, somebody else is trying to, put malware in or something. But it's a good idea. You could definitely consider that, and maybe that is a part of what's being considered. What else could one do? Marcus, yes?
They could have like a backup officer with equal authority that can also launch the missiles.
Yes, but you could do that. Redundancy might be good. There's the problem that you've also created two guys who can launch the missiles, and that could be a problem. Okay. I think there's another thing that I'm thinking of, which I'm confident you guys can think of. So you are the commander of this submarine fleet, and you got a lot of things to take care of, but you don't want any captains becoming moralists at the critical moment. Yes? Because that's not your job. Okay, Ryan?
I guess you could implement some kind of like punishment. Like if you don't do what I tell you, then you get the axe or something. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, but when you only get the axe after you nuke, Moscow, I don't know. So you could do that. I'm sure that you wouldn't be uh, greatly appreciated if you started your own war with Russia, and they would retaliate as well. Okay, Nathan.
Um, do you do what the army does and teach everyone they got to follow the orders? You drill into them that they have to follow orders at all times.
Uh, you would do that for sure. Okay, and the military is very good at that. Uh, okay. Um, all right. I'll tell you what I would do. if I was running this here fleet of deadly submarines. They're out there, presumably a mile under the ocean. Because that's where they hang out. And so how am I going to tell them if I need to launch? Well, I'm going to send some signal to them, all encrypted and all of that, right? I'm going to send a signal to the submarine captain that says, launch the missiles in so many words, right? That's what I'm going to do. So why don't I instead gain control of the submarine remotely because it's built for this to happen, and I turn off all the actuators. That is, if you push the button, nothing's going to actually happen. Yes. And then I send the order to the captain, push the button. Now, the captain won't know whether it's a real test or not. I send to the sonar receivers, beeps that suggest they're being, your submarine's being tracked. I create a scenario that looks like a real attack. Yes. And then, of course, I send the signal, but I've turned off all the actuators. That is, if you push the launch button, nothing's going to happen. Right. And I see whether the captain, pushed the button or not. And if you don't push the button, you're no longer going to be captain. Yeah? That makes sense to me. I would do it. Does it work for you guys?
As a note professor, that sounds very Ender's Game inspired.
I listened to Ender's Game on I wasn't enamored with it as much as most people were. Did you really like it? I mean, it's a very big book, and
I read it when I was really young, like maybe when I was 10. So I feel like I have rose-colored, like rose-tinted glasses on it. Um,
yeah.
I thought it definitely brought up some very interesting issues for me.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it was a very um the guy who wrote its name starts with a C, right? Do you remember? Okay. Well, anyway, yeah. Uh I assume a lot of you guys read it. And you're right. Now that you mention it, Nathan, now I grok that, and I don't want to give any spoilers here, but yes, what Ender, well, look, I'm going to give some spoilers here. If you don't want to hear, turn off something on your computer when I count to five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So yeah, so Ender's this kid, and he's in this school or environment where he just plays video games, and he competes with other video game players. And uh, there's a goal to be the best video game player among all these guys. And the one who is quite clearly the best is Ender. And so Ender is involved in all of these video games, and he can't actually see the other video players. He can just see them in the context of the game. And so uh, he eventually starts playing games that become harder and harder. Like, it's really tough to win this game, but he always prevails. Okay. And then it turns out that the games he's playing are against actual invaders of his planet, whose intent is to destroy his planet. And so he thinks he's playing a video game, but he's actually defending the planet. Yeah, that's what happens. And yes, this is very much like what I'm talking about. Yeah, good point, Nathan. So I would do these tests where the the captain can't tell if it's a real test or not. And based on his response, I'll keep him in the job or not. All right. So to me, that reminds me of what happens when we have dreams sometimes. We have dreams like we're being chased by a lion, right? But do we run around the room until we smack into a light or something? We don't. Our actuators are turned off. Yes. So I'm wondering if part of what dreaming is all about is running these games. It may be about a lot of other things, but I'm thinking it's running these games. Yeah. Um, and when the wolf is not hunting and he's asleep, does he dream of hunts? And is that a means that he becomes a better hunter? For example, you've probably all seen dogs when they're sleeping, start to get agitated, um, etc., right? Is this a way to use our brains when the wolf is not hunting to make him a better hunter? All right. So much for that. It's time for our break. I'll see you guys at 3:05. Yeah, I think I'll see you at 3:05. Okay, we're back. So, to continue on this,
Professor, sorry, can I?
sure, John.
So we discussed dreams. Would you think of imagination as having a similar analogy with simulation in computers? So like Einstein's thought experiments and how he used that to conclude things about the world.
Yes, I do think that they're similar. I mean, I don't claim to have a sort of firm grasp on what's going on in the unconscious and how dreams are and but I think this is a clue, maybe, of some of what dreams are about. But I think this is also what is going on even when we're not dreaming, in the sense that our unconscious mind is doing all these kind of things on a regular basis, including these kind of simulations. So the details are beyond me, but okay. All right. So back to,
Our brains do all of these things. So, it should be no surprise that 500 million years after planarians, we can see ourselves in the context of our environment, record some of what we see, and process, think about, what has been stored to plan for a better future. Nor should we be surprised that part of this processing involves simulating elaborate fictional scenarios, and based partially on our performance in them, modifying our future behavior. It appears that the collection of things our brains can do has led us to consider ourselves conscious.
okay. So I think this sort of gets to maybe what, Ryan, I think it was you who said, when we wipe away, sort of consciousness is what's left over when we wipe away whatever's unconscious. And I can appreciate that, but my view is similar but different. When we wipe away all of the things that we do that we can explain as just the normal sort of evolution of computers and more neurons and stuff like that, when we wipe those away, what are we left with? And as far as I can see, we're left with nothing. So,
It appears that the collection of things our brains can do has led us to consider ourselves conscious. But nothing that happened in the 500 million years since planarians arose was amazing, or miraculous, each step was quite mundane. Our brain is better than the planarians, but it is not different in kind.
so that's sort of where I am currently on consciousness. It's nothing special. Do you guys think there's more? I don't. Okay, let's see.
As an aside, while there is no special sauce required for consciousness, there are many interesting open questions. Where does the conscious part of our brain reside? How is it organized? How does it interact with the unconscious parts? What was the evolutionary advantage for the human gene set to arrange things this way? What is its role in perception? See perceptions. And, perhaps most importantly, how are consciousness and social behavior related? See cultural preens and the perception of emotions. The human brain is the best computer around right now, but all the amazing things we perceive in ourselves are just things that computers can do. As computers, biological or not, get better, they will do all manner of things that will amaze us, including things that we cannot do and have never dreamed could be done. Ever since Darwin, we have had to accept the possibility that something would eventually evolve to supplant humans as the dominant form of intelligent life on Earth. But much like the idea that the sun will eventually stop shining, the idea that eventually something might supplant us seemed to be of only theoretical interest. If it happened at all, it would happen in the very distant future. Hence, it is with considerable surprise that the rapid emergence of non-biological computers has forced us to consider the possibility that we might be supplanted in the near term.
Okay. So that's sort of my current view is, for what it's worth, of consciousness. Nothing special, just what computers can do. And why does it happen in humans? Well, because it provides some advantage. And uh, my guess is that the advantage that it provides is social interaction. Okay, but at any rate, all right. So having done that, let's move on to the next chapter we're going to cover. Um, by the way, maybe I will do a little survey to see what you guys would be interested in. So, table of contents. Okay, on the origins of society, you guys understand uh, already. Uh, we've done that, but that's part one of this larger book that I'm forever working on. Part two is we're going to discuss humans. We're going to discuss what a piece of work is a man, like what are humans, what your hardware is, what your brains are, and okay, uh, when and well, why and when you will die. Why do we die at all? Why do creatures die? Why do humans die? Women. Uh, what will our genes do now? What are our genes trying to kill us? Okay. Then part three is computers. What a piece of work is a computer? A little story about the computer virus, which we've already heard. Marco told us about it. What does a computer look like? A new type of computer. On the evolution of the human brain. That's the chapter we just did. The unlikely human offspring. The rise of the Turines. And then there's part four, which is called inquiries. And it's alive is the question of what does it mean to be living? The gold star of truth we've already gone over. What are emotions? That's still very much in the works, but that's there. Perceptions. Don't put your hand in fire on the evolutionary advantage of perceptions. Cultural preens and the perception of emotions. Perceptions evolve. Okay, and then we get into the now new mathematical foundation for preen theory. All right. So do any of these topics catch your eye? Want to know about them?
The mathematical theory.
Yes, I was gonna say the same thing.
Oh, you want to see the mathematical
Yeah.
theory? Well, I'm delighted because I'd love to discuss it with you guys, but at the same time, I'm not sure everybody would love to discuss this. All right, it gets mathematical, but let me think about that. Yeah. Okay.
It's Alive also seems pretty interesting, and I read over the break the why do we die, and I thought that was pretty interesting as well. All the analogy with companies and businesses.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that input. Let's see. Maybe let me think about the mathematical theory, and maybe we can talk a little about it outside the course. Or Yeah. So let's see. Here's a topic that I don't think there's this area called perceptions. Okay. And uh, it's a very interesting thing to me. Um, here's what it involves. Um, are you guys familiar with the notion of qualia? Or did we discuss it? I think like we did a little bit. No, qualia? Anybody? Okay. So this is something philosophers, in particular philosophers of the brain, uh, worry about. All right. So here's what it's about. Um, do you guys know what an orange tastes like? It's you do. Okay. Um, do you know let's see. Um, do you know the sound of a trumpet? Okay. Um, do you know oh, do you know the smell of Parmesan cheese? Okay. Um, uh, do you know what it feels like to be sad, to be happy? Okay, so now here's what the philosophers were investigating. Oh, and by the way, do you know what it feels like to burn yourself in a fire? I mean, well, no, I don't mean totally. To have put your finger on something that was hot, so hot that you screamed, right? Okay. So those things I mentioned are called qualia. I guess the word comes from the quality of some experience. You know, it's philosophy, so okay. Um, and so the basic sort of question is, why do we have these things? What purpose do these, I'll call them perceptions here, but qualia is what they call them in philosophy. What is the purpose of having those things? So, for example, why do we feel pain when we put our finger on something very hot? Why?
Because with enough exposition, it may kill us and reduce the copy number of our genes.
Yes, but that's not a subtle enough answer in this case because um well what if we didn't feel pain when we put our finger on? Then what would happen?
Then we might do it more often.
And that would be a bad thing, right?
Yes.
Okay. Ryan, what do you got to say?
I think it has to do with there's some nuance in these choices. So like taking the perspective of like, we like a rational agent acts by maximizing expected utility based on how painful something is, it sort of changes how strongly you decide to react to it. So the fact that we feel pain is, in my mind, related to the fact that it's not just completely binary, this is bad, you shouldn't do it, this is good, you should do it. There's also like some nuance to how much of it you should do, and that sort of plays a role in important decision makings because In some cases, you can't avoid a bad outcome, and you need to know how bad something is going to be.
Okay, I accept that. Let's focus this question down a little bit more. What if you didn't feel pain when you put your finger in a fire, say, or on a stove? Let's do it that way. Why would that be bad?
Well, because it would allow for behavior that ultimately decreases our gene's copy number, which is exposure to something that kills the physical copies.
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry. Please go on, John. I should
No,
have told you.
that was it. That's as far as I can go.
For example, are you suggesting that, it's important to pull your hand off the stove once you feel the pain?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay. Would you be surprised to find out that that's wrong? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yes.
It's wrong to take your hand quickly off.
No, that's a good idea. I recommend you keep doing that. But it's wrong that that has anything to do with the pain you feel. That's what's wrong. Okay? That's what's wrong. And so we and and that's why this, the subchapter of perceptions begins with don't put your hand on in fire. So if the reason we feel the qualia of pain when we put our hand on the stove, uh, one might say the reason we feel it is because we move our hand away and therefore don't get, destroyed worse. Yes. But that's false. That's wrong. And so now we have to find another reason why it is that we feel pain when we do that. Because the reason that comes to mind right away is incorrect. Okay. So Isabel?
Like maybe, I mean, because I was thinking about like qualia that you mentioned, like, is it all, because like I think we all have like shared experiences, like we all kind of know what orange like looks like or like tastes like. So it's like hard to communicate. Like if we don't have that, it's hard to communicate like to another person what that feels like.
Yes, and I think that's what I'm led to believe as well, that perceptions are about communication. Okay. But in my casual observance of this idea within philosophy, just casually, I think that I've never seen them aware of that is the actual reason for the purpose of communication, or at least that's a reason that we have this. So let's see. Okay, so I guess we had some votes for a mathematical foundation. And then we had some, uh, I guess I want to explore qualia. Okay. And then it's alive seemed interesting. And why and when you will die, I guess, attracted some interest. Okay. But for right now, let's go to something that in the remaining time, which is fairly obvious to us now, but I'd like to cover it at this moment, I guess. Hang on a second. What is going on? Oh, we never directly covered the chapter in DTD, the selfish preen, did we? So we should. So let me try to figure out how to do this.
I'm sorry, Professor, but I didn't get why pain wasn't linked with self-preservation.
Oh, yeah. First of all, it's probably linked to self-preservation because, you wouldn't have it if it wasn't. But it's not linked to what you think it's linked to, I would suggest. That is, it's not because you then move your hand away when you feel the pain. That's not what happens. Okay, it does have a purpose, but it isn't that, right? It isn't. Yeah. Okay, so I didn't articulate that very well, but hopefully you get the idea. Let me find the chapter view. Navigation pane. Okay. Here we go. And as indicated here, this needs a little work. All right. So, as you know, Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene. And this book involves some generalization of that idea to preens. And so this chapter is the selfish preen. That is, it's not just genes, it's all preens that are selfish. So let's go through it a little bit in the time remaining, just so we have it on the record. Okay. So here we are. Let's see, view, focus. No, that wasn't it. View, focus. Okay. So if preens were people, this picture, yes? The people in this video are not nice, right? They're killing each other or trying in this image that I captured. Okay.
In the resurrection of smallpox, we considered what can happen when a single preen is stored in many different types of physical objects. Here, we will begin to consider what can happen when a single physical object stores many different preens.
Okay, so it's a very important distinction that physical objects can store lots of preens, what we call a preen set. Yes? And okay, we're going to consider that.
The most important thing to remember is that preens are not nice. Even the be nice preen is not nice. Preens care about their own survival and nothing else. A preen may form an alliance with other preens to form a preen set, but if that alliance becomes a burden, the preen will abrogate it without the slightest remorse. Consider the bread mold, Neurospora crassa. It stores a set of genetic preens that have formed an alliance. When placed in minimal medium, water with some salts, sugar, and a few vitamins, each mold thrives and produces offspring that, with the exception of mutants, store the same genetic preen set.
Right? So this mold stores a gene set that consists of a lot of different genes. And um, and you can take I guess, a cell of this mold, and you can put it in what's called minimal media, which is just some simple stuff. And it'll start to divide and produce offspring, which will store the same genetic preset, though there may be the occasional mutant, right? All right.
But what would happen if you began regularly adding new substances to the medium? For example, uracil, a substance used in making RNA. Thanks to the work of Beadle and Tatum, 1941, we can be pretty sure of the answer.
So we had this minimal media, salt, sugar, a few vitamins and things. And now we begin putting this uracil into it. We just start adding that on a regular basis. There's already mold living there and thriving, presumably. Okay, but now we start adding this uracil. And as I say, uracil is a substance that's used in making RNA.
Among the genetic preens stored within each mold, there was an important subset which we will call the uracil subset. All the genetic preens in the set really liked the uracil subset a lot, because a mold that did not store that subset could not synthesize uracil from the minimal medium, could not make RNA, and would die, thereby reducing the copy number of all the genetic preens in the set.
Right? So all the genes in the set were real happy with the uracil subset. Yes?
However, once there was free uracil available in the medium, the rest of the genetic preens in the set would ask, what do we need those guys for? They would turn on the uracil subset and cast them out. Those molds that discontinued storing the uracil subset still had uracil, but those molds that continued to store even one member of the uracil subset had to continue spending resources on the subset's maintenance and reproduction. Natural selection would ensure that after a while, only molds that stopped storing the uracil subset would survive.
You understand that? I mean, that getting rid of the uracil genes would actually enhance the chances of survival. For example, you have to, when a cell of the mold reproduces, it's got to reproduce this uracil subset if it wants to keep it around. And that's going to slow its rate of expansion, rate of doubling. And we know that you can't, in a competitive situation, slow down this rate because you'll lose to the other molds that have gotten rid of all the uracil subset. Okay.
There is a reason the lion does not lie with the lamb, why animals in the forest do not live in harmony, and why a world without human conflict will never persist.
So let's talk about that. We might, I think we would all like it if we lived in a world without human conflict. Or at least most of us probably wouldn't. Would. Do you think we'll ever achieve that?
I think yes, but not in the way that you want.
Okay. Can you elaborate, please, Ryan?
I think we'll achieve human harmony by wiping out all the humans.
Yes. Now that I do agree with. Okay. Yes. And you might achieve it briefly if you wipe out all but one. But I agree with you, Ryan. Absolutely. John?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be a stable equilibrium because there might be mutations in new generations, and if the mutations are sort of like predatory, they can feed on this harmony. Right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's exactly right. So yes. So as I articulate it, such situations rely on selflessness and are unstable, even though that may not be apparent. Okay. But you have to ask, what happens when a mutant lion is born with an appetite for what just happened here? With an appetite for lamb. Yes. Because he doesn't even have to hunt these lambs that are lying with the lion, right? They're just right there. He can just, it's snack time. He can become a couch potato. And he gets a lot of food and he probably has reproductive advantage. Yes? Okay. So the problem is that the collection of organisms that you want to live in harmony uh, cannot have situations where someone violates that harmony and gains an advantage. All right, so the same thing happens in societies all the time. You have societies, and then somebody gets it into their heads that, well, I think we'd be a lot better off if we left this big society, this nation, say, and had our own society where we could rule ourselves. Yes. And this can happen because uh, somebody gets the idea that they're being oppressed, typically, or it can be because this is the a part of society that thinks a lot of our resources are being drawn from us to go to places that we may not even like. Yes. And so we'd be better off separating. Yes. And so uh, that's why none of this stuff works, except I agree with Ryan's solution. Yeah. Get rid of everybody, save one, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the take
When many
home,
preens are stored together in an instrument, such as a cell or a human, the stored preens will fight each other to control the instrument and use it for their own survival. If a subset of preens gains control and induces behavior that is harmful to other preens, well, that's their problem. So, preen sets are seldom happy places. Why should you care if preens are unhappy? Because their unhappiness sometimes becomes your unhappiness, as we shall see in the war within.
okay. So the war within was that Joan of Arc thing. All right. So, but the important take home message, which I've referred to a few times, is that just because you have a bunch of preens in a preen set and they're all stored in various instruments, uh, they have no regard for one another. They're perfectly happy to let the other preens in the set die if it means they can use the resources, the instrument, to help them do better. So that's the perception. This is not a team. Okay. All right. So took care of that. Um, let's see. Um, I think what I'd like to do with regard to the mathematics thing is I'll send out a email suggesting that if any of you want to join me on a time to be determined and start to go over this mathematics, then we'll arrange such a time. Because I think it's really interesting, but I don't think it would be interesting to everybody. Okay, so if you are interested, maybe I don't need to send the email, but I probably will. If you are interested, then send me an email, say you're interested. Okay. Right. Um, good. Um, all right. So I think I'm going to stop sharing and all right. So, any other comments or remarks from anything? Um, hmm, okay. Uh, Martino, I I didn't watch the whole video you sent me, as you know, right? But that's just me personally. Um, that's just my own flaw that in many ways I don't like looking at other people's ideas. You, and this is another thing about research. You can look at other people's ideas. That's one of the reasons you go to school to learn basic stuff. And then you can stop looking at other people's ideas because other people's ideas can be constrain your view. Um, and maybe you won't see things you'd see otherwise. So that was part of the reason uh, that I didn't want to watch it. Sorry for that, but I did like your bringing it up. Um, okay. Um, what else should we discuss? Oh, I'll tell you something we could discuss. Oh yeah, Martino.
There was one thing relating to what we just talked about that I wanted to ask
Yes.
position or opinion on, which is, so you mentioned that, so within a gene set, obviously there's a interdependence of the genes, and those, for example, the uracil genes, um, when uracil is just provided by the medium, they're no longer needed, and so they're cut out. Now, I know that, for example, our bodies, our cells have mechanisms that are kind of like second, like plan B mechanisms, in the sense that
Mhm.
say we arrive in an environment where something that's usually provided is no longer there. Our body or our cells individually have mechanisms through which they can supplement that missing resource in a different way. And
Mhm.
it can happen in the body through the conversion of lipids to glucose through gluconeogenesis, for example. No.
Yes.
However, if you always have glucose in your diet coming in constantly, you don't need gluconeogenesis. However, we still have that gluconeogenesis pathway
Yes.
as kind of like a fail-safe, you know? So
Yes.
what I'm proposing is that we have some kind of defunct or not like active genes in our gene set that are still useful in the possibility that our environment changes, so we don't just get extirpated the moment that one of our vital resources is either altered or lost.
Excellent point, Martino. So let me ask you, why do you think we have these reserve genes? I'll call them for want of something else. Why would we keep them around?
Well, as you mentioned, they do make our like genetic replication longer and more energy intensive because,
Yes.
we have
Oh
to,
no.
but
Oh,
more,
sorry.
but I do think that the drawback of keeping them around is outweighed by the possibility to be adaptive within our own lives, because some organisms who might have a more fixed, reduced kind of basic set of abilities and functions, their adaptation might be limited from generation to generation, whereas our species were able to grow up in one environment, be exposed to a completely different environment, and still survive.
Absolutely. I'm on the same page. That is, keeping these genes around pays off often enough that the gene set,
Yeah.
does better
And
with them.
And I also think it enables us to have longer generations. And I'm sure you could actually look into this. I mean, animals that live like and I'm not talking about plants here, because those
Okay.
for thousands of years or simply weeks, but I'm talking about like mobile organisms here.
Okay. Mammals, maybe.
Yes, for
Okay.
example, like the simpler the genome, the more dependent that animal is on short-term reproduction, right? Because they need to be able to adapt to environmental changes faster because they don't have as many genes with from to pull from when they're adapting in their day-to-day life to the environment. Whereas like blue whales who reproduce, like once every 50 years, they
Yeah.
probably have a lot more of those kind of reserve genes that you were mentioning because they can't reproduce as quickly, and so therefore their ability to adapt to changing environments is kind of hindered by that temporal factor.
I like your thinking, Martino. I have not reflected on exactly what you've talked about. I did reflect on the difference between species that are sort of stuck in their environment and species that are very malleable in the, if that's the right word, in their environment, like canines, for example, found all over the world. And if you take a dog and throw them out just about any place, they might figure out how to stay alive and reproduce. Um, okay, but I like your thinking. You're saying, to summarize, you're saying that animals that don't have this sort of reserve of genes are more likely to reproduce quickly because then they need to adapt to new situations. And the more generations, faster you're going to adapt. Uh, I think that's a very good point. And they do gain um, efficiency in reproduction without having to carry around these other things. So there may well be a sweet point, where you carry around less or more of these reserves, and your species does best at this particular point. So yeah, I like that. Good idea. You should talk more. Okay, talk more now if you'd like.
Well,
Okay.
no, I mean, yeah, thank you for that. I just this is something that I learned in an ecology course that I took a couple of years ago, in which we were comparing kind of the life cycles of a fruit fly, for example, versus that of an elephant or a large mammal with a long reproductive timeline. And
That's right. Elephants, it's about 2 years of incubation. I mean, they're pregnant for about 2 years, for example.
And the concern here is that animals who have such long incubation periods and reproductive life cycles will have a harder time adapting to climate change because the rate of climate change is so fast that it's now within one generation. There's already a noticeable difference in whether it be temperature or ocean pH, for different environments.
Hmm.
So those animals that have long reproductive cycles will be less able to mutate fast enough to be able to survive in those changing conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that, and that may be right. Uh, I'm not convinced that that's such an important point. Um, like, let's take elephants. They've probably been around a long time, and in particular, they've survived, I guess, the ice ages. That, the recent one, 10,000 years ago, or thereabouts, 12,000. Um, they've survived a lot of stuff, and but they're, in our terms, very slow to create new generations. Um, how does one reconcile that with the view?
I think one would probably look to see, I mean, I don't know personally, but you could investigate whether the rate of change, the ice age obviously was a drastic change in environmental temperature, weather patterns, everything, but the 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 time in which it took for the planet to cool those, I don't know, 4 degrees Celsius, I don't know how much it is, but could be over the span of 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 years, no? Whereas now, even in the last few centuries, we've seen an increase in global temperatures that's compared to historical patterns, I guess, a faster rate than what's been, in precedent.
I
Yeah.
I do understand that uh, from these ice cores and things that we can trace, for example, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that it does show a very rapid increase. So I don't doubt that. Um,
Wait,
oh yes.
there's one more thing that I want to bring up, and it actually goes in perfectly in line with what you just mentioned, is that you're right, you're absolutely correct that all modern day mammals survived the ice age, even the most recent one.
Mhm.
However, think of all those large megafauna that we know of off the top of our head that didn't. I mean, the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the giant sloth, like these are all large mammals, or I don't know, I guess the sloth could have been a marsupial. I'm not exactly sure of the taxonomy, but these are all large animals that probably, presumably, had a long reproductive cycle. And we know that they're extinct because even though they were adapted to those cold environments, when the temperature of the earth heated, it heated too fast for them. I mean, the woolly mammoth lost its environment and so it went extinct. So the examples that come to mind, I'm wondering if there are examples of smaller um, genomes or more simpler genomes that also went extinct because they weren't able to adapt from the ice age. And my theory would be that there are less because they had shorter reproductive cycles and therefore their ability to adapt to changing temperatures when the climate warmed was easier. It was
Yes, and well, I don't know the answer, but you're asking a good question. But I do think you might be onto something that's, a trade-off that happens between keeping extra genes and reproducing fast. And yeah, I don't know if I mean, can we learn anything by looking at, say, the COVID virus? And probably not, but it seems there's been a gazillion generations of that. And so just because there's so many generations, so many different viruses have been built up over the time, and it has a very small genome, I think. Uh, so it can reproduce very quickly. Is it the case that that fast reproduction has allowed it to survive better because it goes through so many generations and things? I, I'm sort of mumbling here because I don't have a crisp answer. But I do like the question very much. And I think those are really excellent thoughts. So yeah. And okay, so we're gonna end it here. Um, if you would be interested in joining for a mathematical discussion of this, because I think I've finally figured out the right thing until you guys show me that I'm wrong, um, then please send me an email and we'll try to work something out. Okay? All right. As usual, it's been very enlightening. Thank you. All right. I'm trying to get off.